What's up YouTube? It's Matt with That Jeep Adventure, and believe it or not, today we are going to start episode 12. So back to the CJ project. As a refresher, we were combining two Jeeps into one. So we have this 73 right here that the tub and parts of the frame are pretty bad off in rust. And then we picked up a 79 CJ5 from a buddy that the motor was blown up, but the body and the frame are in pretty good shape. So he already had that Jeep pretty much torn down. The only body part left on it was the tub, the fenders and the hood and the grill and all that were off. So while it was already down that far, we decided just to go ahead and tear it all the way down, fix everything up, refresh the suspension, paint everything, go through the axles, put new bearings and seals and do all that. So we got all that done. So now what has been kind of holding me up lately, on this project at least, part of why the big absence is I had to rebuild the TJ. We pretty much have to keep it going so we can hit the trail. If I just spent all the time working on the CJ5 and never got to go trail riding, I would get pretty burned out pretty quick. So had to take some time off of this project and had to do a ton of maintenance to the TJ, but it's pretty much good to go now. Also, we did a lot of upgrades to the van, converted the Chevy Express to being a primitive camping style van, nothing too fancy, but definitely makes the wheeling trips a whole lot more comfortable. Okay, enough of that, back to the CJ. So since the fenders and the hood and the grill were already off, I didn't get to show that process in any of the videos. So now that the other Jeep, the 79, is pretty much ready for the motor and the transmission, I'm going to go ahead and tear the front off of this and start working on labeling all the wires and getting the motor out of this and ready to go into the other Jeep. We're rebuilding the transmission out of the other Jeep. We started tearing it down probably a few months ago. I had two identical transmissions. I had one out of that Jeep, and then I bought another one, transmission and transfer case from George, because the internals seemed to be in better condition than the one I had. The price was right, so we went ahead and picked that one up and decided to rebuild that one. So we tore down the one that I'm not going to rebuild just for practice and to do a little detective work and see how tedious the process would be. I've never rebuilt a transmission. My buddies have never rebuilt one. So we decided we would tear it down and determine if we thought that we could do it. And after the teardown process, even though it's a 3-speed and super primitive, it's still a little overwhelming for sure. So I talked to George, and he is going to help us rebuild that transmission. So that video will be on the way also. That's pretty much the biggest thing holding me up at the moment is that transmission rebuild and then getting this motor out. So gonna take this out now, show you how to get the fenders and the hood and the grill and all that off. It's pretty simple. So let's get to work. Alright, so I want to fire this thing up one more time before we pull it out of the Jeep. So it's been sitting for a few months. I've been bad. I haven't cranked it. I usually try to come out here at least every couple weeks and turn it over and just let it run for a second. It does need a new water pump, so that's going to be part of what we're switching out. So I'm going to just crank it up, let it run for just a second, and then shut it back off. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it won't be too difficult to get it running today. All right, so that was good news. It fired up pretty quick. Now we know that it runs, and whenever I get it in the new Jeep, if it doesn't crank pretty easy, then we know that I did something wrong, which will probably not be surprising during this process. So anyway, man, I forgot how awesome it sounds. These old 258s kind of have a good rumble to them. All right, so time to get it torn down. We're gonna start with the hood, and then we're gonna get the fenders off, and then we're gonna end with the grill, and then it'll be time to start clipping wires and making labels. All right, the battery is out, and we got the starter solenoid, all the wires off of it. So now this fender is free. The reservoir for the radiator was on here too. We popped that tube off. So now we've got to get the other side, all the connections off of that fender. Looks like there's some wires that are kind of zip tied through the fender. So we're gonna cut those loose and mark whatever we need to. And then we're gonna remove the grill supports. Now that we have all the electrical off of both of the fenders, we are going to remove the braces that are between the wheel well and the firewall, and then take out a few bolts, and we're going to pop these fenders off. So now that the inner supports are off, the next step is to remove 3 bolts that are behind here, and then there is 3 bolts that connect the inside of the fender. I'll lighten this up for you. There are 3 bolts right here that we are going to remove. So the bolts back here that go through the firewall are kind of seized up. So I'm going to use PB Blaster, spray it on there and let it soak for a minute. And then I'm going to hit it with this pneumatic ratchet because it's kind of awkward to get to. And I mean, this isn't like impact or anything, but I think maybe it'll hit it hard enough to like break it free to spin it out, but not hard enough to break the bolt off. So we're going to give that a shot. Alright, so that was pretty easy. The fenders came right off. Now we are going to move on to getting the grill off. The wiring harness, I may have misspoken earlier. The wiring harness, I'm marking everything, but the 79 Jeep, this is the 73, the 79 that this motor is going into is a little different. The ignition on this Jeep is on the dash. The ignition on the 79 is on the steering column. So there's gonna be some differences. So I'm gonna have to try to reuse what I have of the wiring harness from the 79. The problem with that is there's nothing that's marked. This is my first time like swapping from year to year doing anything like this. So if it was marked, it would make my life a lot easier, but there's gonna be extra knowledge gained in this learning process of sorting all that out. So even though it may not be easy, I'll probably be better by the end of it, just knowledge wise. So let's get the grill off. We're about ready to get the engine pulled out of this. All right, for the sake of ease and quickness getting this off, we're gonna leave the radiator attached to it, and then just kind of keep it all in less pieces until I need some of this stuff, and then I'll disassemble further and like grab the radiator. I may even reuse this whole grill on the new one. Once I get the 2 grills side by side, I'll be able to see which one's in better shape. So just gonna keep it together as much as possible for now. So first thing we're gonna do is unhook the hoses, and I think there's 1 body mount bolt up under the center of this thing, and it should pop right off. Alright, so you can see this big mess I made, all because I forgot this little bitty step here. Right there is the drain on the bottom of the radiator. Pull that, and let it go into a bucket before you unhook the hoses. I mean, there's still going to be a little in there, but we've got an antifreeze swimming pool. I guess on the plus side, it looks like it's mostly water in there, so it could be worse. Now that the grill and radiator are off, we're gonna go through and clip whatever wires are left or unhook them if there's a connector there. Try to finish labeling stuff. When we pull it, we're gonna pull obviously the transmission and the transfer case, all of it at once. Just for ease, I think, of getting it out. I say that's kind of the plan. I'm only using the motor. I'm not using the transfer case or transmission on this. So if it looks like it's easy to separate from the motor here initially, then I may just separate it and pull the motor. But the plan right now is to pull it all. So I'll have to unhook the front and rear drive shaft. We will have to loosen the bolts underneath the transfer case or transmission that hold it to the cross member, and then the motor mounts, and I think that should be about it. So not too terribly much work, but getting it out. I mean, I've got the engine lift, which, I mean, couldn't do it without that. So, but I'm imagining that it's still going to be at least a little bit awkward getting it out. But once we get it up, the plan is to just roll this Jeep out of the shop. And then I'll probably leave this bay open so I can leave my TJ over here and then use the other bay for assembly on the CJ5, the 79 on that side. Alright, well, I'm going to call it quits for the day. The motor is ready to come out. After looking at it a little more, I think I'm just gonna pull just the motor and leave the transmission and the transfer case in. Seems like a lot of extra work to get it ready to come out as like a whole piece. Whenever I go to separate the two, pulling the motor out, I may regret the decision, but it just seems a lot easier to pull just the motor now. So that's what I'm gonna do. So that does it for tonight. So next time I'm out here, we're gonna be getting the motor out of this thing.